Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, March 27th, 2026. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing friend and co-host, David Brill. Our colleague, Joshua Ashley Clayman. David might be on the Gulf Stream, and I'm not quite sure yet, but if she joined us, that will be great as well. Thank you all for joining us on LinkedIn Live and X and on YouTube. If you have questions for David or I, please put them in the chat. We'll try to address them. There's a lot to cover today. And our usual disclaimers, obviously nothing we're talking about is any sort of investment or legal advice. And what David and I chat about really are our own personal opinions, not necessarily the opinions of our firms. David, 300 text messages through the week later, you and I look at BTC below 66 now, if my desktop is right. There's a lot going on in this space, David, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a floor coming up or is there a bottom waiting for us?
Feels like, unless we see a resolution of what's going on in the Middle East, feels like we're headed lower.
Yeah.
And in some ways, crypto's led the markets down in the past, sometimes because it was the only thing trading on the weekends or,
Right.
It's been one of the risk assets that sort of turned first. But it's going to be interesting this time around, considering what may happen and what the effects are. So I think ultimately when you're in these uncertain markets, holding risk assets becomes a little more challenging.
Yeah. David, to that point, it's funny, I've been banging the drum on skew related to Bitcoin. And I think we're seeing this bear out when markets go up, depending, Bitcoin generally moves up with it, but not as fast. When markets go down, Bitcoin goes down faster. And that negative skew, I think, is tied to overnight markets, 24-hour trading, etc. I guess the question ends up becoming, we still continue to see the institutional builds and work happening in the background. I'm going to ask a question, David, that I'm trying to wrap my own head around, which is the downward pressure on the retail side? I don't think it is, but I'm not sure what I see in the flows.
I think the retail, that every time we go down a level, is buying the dip. And then unfortunately, it's going lower.
Then we go down again, yeah.
And then we go down again. With the exception of MicroStrategy or Strategy and Tom Lee's with BitMiner, that's what it feels like. And,
yeah.
When we were talking about this in the green room, but, I'm always been a big fan of ETH and a big supporter. But I do worry if BitMiner were to need to sell for some reason, considering what they've amassed, what that could do to the price of ETH. And I'm not saying by any reason we have any knowledge of why they would need to sell. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, understood.
If they needed to sell, that could be, a real downward pressure on ETH.
That'll be an ugly catalyst. But you're forcing me to rip up the script already, David. We're only a couple of minutes in because you brought up ETH and you brought up BitMiner. And, when I looked at the market action over the past several weeks and everyone was kind of bashing on Strategy, for example, and again, we have no business relationship with Strategy particularly, and the fear that they'd have to sell. Strategy's been buying, but the other DATCos, we used to call them, I think we still do, seem to have been relatively quiet. David, are DATCos done in a market like this?
I just don't think they have any more capital to deploy. And also, candidly, like looking at the chart, like we're still in we're in a downward phase. We're in a very orderly bear market, which, doesn't feel.
It's not panicky.
It's not panicky. It's just like it's a step down sort of. We're in a stage 4 downtrend, and it's hard to buy in this environment. I mean, I think for those who are dollar cost averaging, I would say, yeah, continue to do that.
Right.
But for those who are buying, big chunks, it's hard to keep buying big chunks when you kind of look at what the markets look like.
David, good point. Emma Channing, it's good to see you. The DeFi report today argued that perps are increasingly becoming a retail product, and that's why it moves faster. Absolutely, don't doubt it. I haven't read the DeFi report yet today. Emma, good to see you again. It's been too long, old friend. David, the other thing I want to add to this is I without weighing in on particular judgments of what's happening geopolitically or macroeconomically, there is a lot of chaos going on, and I just use that word to cover a broad spectrum of stuff. You've got conflict overseas, you've got macroeconomic headwinds, including jobs data, we've got inflation data moving up. I guess let's start breaking that down a bit. You and I, for a long time, have put forward the idea that it's not the data, it's the revisions.
Yep.
Even the revisions are starting to look a little bumpy. Where's the downtrend for that? Is the catalyst strictly geopolitical?
It's a good question, Ron, because we've had a lot of white collar companies that have laid people off,
Yeah.
and some have blamed AI, or most have blamed AI, and it's never quite clear how much of it is all AI. Maybe the engineering roles, maybe the programming roles are. Some of the other ones, we're not close enough to the companies to really know.
Yeah.
But I think the real issue is more, in my mind, sort of on the supply chain, and
Mm,
how it may affect companies, and how they're thinking about making capital expenditures and things like that. So I think those are the things I'm thinking about in terms of but the one thing that's worth mentioning is that we're really not as much affected here. We have our own domestic oil supply.
yeah.
Our companies could actually be making a lot of money in this environment because we have energy to sell. We have natural resources to sell. So our American companies could do well from this.
Yeah.
Those are the ones not dependent on oil prices, but are more in an exporting role.
But there is the downstream of some of those impacts. I mean, arguably, gasoline, for example,
Yeah.
in the U.S. is notably higher. When you fill up the H2 or the Maserati, David, I'm sure it's costing you a little bit more this week than it did a month or so ago. So we're beginning to see that drag on economic activity. We're beginning to see that, and that's a challenge even in a no hire, no fire economy, job market, and we're starting to see jobs and payroll data go south.
Yeah.
The question becomes, is this all planning given some of the inflation concerns and geopolitical concerns, or are you and I, let's just say, were we wrong in anticipating economic activity through the balance of the year?
Well, I mean, I don't think we until a little bit before, because I think we did say we thought the conflict would break out when it did.
Yeah,
We were a week ahead of
David's
that.
crystal ball was right.
Yeah, so we'll give ourselves some credit there. But look, I don't think we factored in a longer conflict.
Yeah.
And I'm still not quite sure why we can't overcome what's going on in Strait of Hormuz. I
Hmm.
mean, I can't tell you that I've had the time to, read up on it on a deep, deep level, but I feel like if we really wanted to retake it, we could. So I think it's part of some kind of plan. Uh, but I don't think we could have factored in those things. But you're right. Rising oil prices is a tax. It makes airline tickets more expensive, and other transportation things more expensive, and it's a tax on the bottom line for people.
Yeah.
So if they're paying more for travel or to fill up their car, then that's less money they have to buy goods or other things.
Right. David, it's not the Maserati SUV, right? I just want to be clear because I don't think you and I were fond of that one.
No, no. I'm very happy with a self-driving Tesla, but we'll see what. But all kidding aside, like I
Yeah.
do, and we were talking about this last week. People on the lower middle income side of things are struggling,
Yeah.
and this doesn't help.
Exactly. David, I think the other wrinkle to all of this, and one of the interesting takeaways I've had, and I'm trying to keep up with the news out of DC. Shout out to Adam Goldberg, our friend over at Figure, who keeps us from a policy perspective on the straight and narrow. But I saw news recently, yesterday, I think there was a compromise put forward in the Senate on market structure. Two senators on both sides of the aisle put forward something, and not long afterwards, Coinbase came out and said, we're not going to support that either. I'm almost surprised that the crypto market hasn't reacted more negatively in the wake of that news. And that might be me being hopelessly optimistic, David. But what was your take on what the heck we're doing with market structure? And at this point, do we even need market structure legislation?
I don't think that the crypto markets have generally been pricing in market structure. I think that
Yeah.
maybe they were when we were, in an upward trend. I don't think right now in this downward trend that is adding any extra pressure to the markets. I think they're
Yeah,
unfortunately going down on their own, and it's
they've
not.
got enough pressure.
Yeah. Um, that being said, it really depends on how you land fundamentally on stablecoins, and do you think, individuals should have the right to earn rewards or interest from stablecoins? Probably not interest, but rewards from stablecoins.
Careful the word
Or
you use.
they need what'd you say?
Careful the word you use
Yes.
using interest.
But also, like, should people have to do extra things just to earn these rewards?
Right.
And look, at the core, different incumbents are protecting their businesses.
Yep.
Like you mentioned in the green room, Coinbase makes, a fair amount of revenue from offering yield on stable coins.
Yep.
Banks make an awful lot of money, in a savings account by not offering large, interest rates on that savings. So you have different incumbents that are, very important things,
Yep.
to their bottom lines, and they're fighting for it. And it's a little disappointing because I think there really is a way where everybody could be happy.
Yeah.
But, I don't think there's been a legislative answer to that yet.
I agree. And David, I want to dig into something that's really been irking me a little bit because you and I have talked about this and so many other. Emma's given us the long form chats. It'll be hard for us to keep up, but Emma, thank you. Clarity doesn't have the votes at this time, and I think most of crypto knows that. That being said, she's quoting Atkins. After all, Congress can future-proof regulation in this space through comprehensive market structure legislation. I'm not going to read the entire thing, David. There's a lot there. Emma, thank you so much. We'll dig into those most recent statements. David, I want to go back to something we've often spoken about, and I continue to press home this point. I still do not believe it's a zero-sum game, banks versus crypto companies, and I'm struggling to see why that sort of middle ground doesn't make sense for either. Because you talked about incumbents, you talked about kind of their business models. I'm just throwing out some firm names, but we don't work with Circle. Circle has $80 billion under deposit, earning 4% for them. What firm in its right mind would give up that franchise? So I'm trying to see why no one can see the middle ground that might make sense, or even what that might be.
Well, I just think that there's a couple of things at play. I think the industry and the different lobbies on other issues are in alignment.
Yeah.
We want market structure for tokens and listing tokens, and we want a token taxonomy. So I don't think there's genuine dispute at this point on that. I think there's some dispute on DeFi on the edges, but I don't think that's a bank issue as much as that's more of a AML KYC issue.
Yep.
There may be a bank issue at the fringe. But so I think on a lot of these topics, we are very close. It's just that this stablecoin issue has sort of just risen to the top. And it's really, for regular people, it's kind of clouded the other things that are going on in the background.
Yeah.
And we still have that ethics issue floating out there that I do think will get resolved, but is still out there.
I think the ethics issue has been deprioritized, though, in a lot of the discourse. I mean, and again, not weighing positively or negatively on whether there's an issue there. I want to avoid the politics of it, David. But in the conversations, again, shout out to Adam Goldberg. He's raised this and a couple of other colleagues in DC that it is yield that's the biggest impediment right now. So I think the other thing to keep in mind, David, is the clock is ticking in a quite literal sense. There's legislative sessions that are coming up. There's the recess that'll be, and it's an election year. And I think it was Adam, it could have been you. I'm trying to remember who sort of predicted that if this isn't done by May, there's a better than even chance it doesn't get done. Do you agree with that kind of perspective?
Yeah, I think that's something Adam raised, and I concurred with. Look, I think all the parties will have to stare in the mirror at some point and just say, is this something we can move forward with or not?
Yeah.
And I want to bring on, Emma made a point that I had talked about last week. If Atkins and Selig are working to promulgate rules and to, take the taxonomy and really move that forward, we, may in a parallel track be getting the regulation we need for token taxonomy and all of that.
Yeah.
Which is really important. So this isn't a zero-sum game. Like I said last week, I think that the industry I think the rules that were promulgated by the SEC are probably more favorable than what's in the legislation.
And it's certainly more favorable than what the industry's had before.
Yeah.
And you could argue, is the industry, David, waiting for the perfect in spite of the good it sort of has now?
Well, let's be fair. Like,
Yeah,
we're relitigating some of genius in this bill. So,
correct.
in fairness, if we had a steady state and we had genius as it is,
Hmm.
and then token taxonomy as it's proposed to be, and DeFi and the other parts, and genius wasn't touched, I think people would be pretty happy with where we get to.
Yeah, David, I want to point out that as soon as we mentioned legislation, Mabel stuck her head behind a pillow and apparently didn't want to hear it. But David, it is a good point. And one of the things you and I are working on is we're preparing our WSBA trip
Yeah.
to Washington, D.C. So it really is important to sort of represent voice of industry. And David, if I could, I want to pivot a little bit because I think in the noise of clarity, in the noise of Bitcoin now below 66 and the other stuff that we're seeing that's sort of negative, we're missing some of the other pictures too, meaning tokenization. And again, shout out to David Wysocki and Chris Broderson and all our friends on the tokenization working group. There are so many firms, what we used to call TradFi firms, David, that are tokenizing different funds, that are tokenizing equities. We've seen big news out of NYSE and NASDAQ. The builders keep building commentary still applies, correct, David?
Oh, yeah. And look, we were talking about the token prices, and I don't want to, and I'm going to name a few
Yeah.
that have real world use cases that have been growing. But like, let's take a look at Chainlink. They have a lot of real world use cases. Their token price is the same as it was at one point in 2020.
Right.
And so, like, clearly, Chainlink has developed new products and utility over the past 5 years, but the price hasn't moved at all.
Yeah.
But that being said, to your broader point, yes, builders are building. There's more functionality. There's more use cases. Getting some legislation would be helpful to see it more integrated into everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think behind the scenes, things are moving. Things are continuing to move and will move even faster. It's just a matter of the price is just not correlating to that.
Right. And again, I don't mean to revert back to our prior talking point. The price is not correlating with that because of, and I'm just going to use again the word chaos. There's just so much uncertainty across so many different verticals. It's not just a crypto downtrend we're talking about.
No.
I mean, I think I saw this morning, and shout out to I think it was the Bloomberg team who posted that stock and bonds have had their worst month's performance in 4 years.
Yeah.
So this is a broad economic, things are a little crazy. Everyone's slightly scared. Let's talk about the options then, David, because I saw some news and you follow this much more educated than I do, but something like $14 billion in Bitcoin options expire today,
Yeah.
I believe. And I think I saw the data yesterday, David. You were active in the market this week. 300 million longs were liquidated this week in BTC. When you look at these numbers, how do you anticipate the positioning going forward?
Well, the problem is it's skewed, Ron, because there are a lot of
Yep.
longs who are selling covered calls and just are happy to collect the income.
Right.
And in a bear market, and especially like in a stage 4 downtrend, like that makes sense. If you want to hold it, collect some premium for your through covered calls, and see what happens.
Yeah.
So, and it's been a successful strategy, of course, until it's not. But
Yeah.
the liquidations, look, people are just continuing to play with leverage and do it in a way where they run the risk of being liquidated. And I think also we've seen like bigger moves just because of what's going on in the macroeconomic environment.
Yeah.
And that leads to liquidations when people are doing 20, 50, 100x. Small moves can either make you a hero or make you a zero, and unfortunately more times it's a zero than a hero.
We'll have to get Emma Channing back on the show now that she's watching, just to talk a little bit about the Channing family office and what kind of positions they're looking at, David. I appreciate that. It's interesting because when we look at how we're talking about positioning and options, it doesn't take away some of the other parts of that news cycle. And I didn't raise this in our prep or in the virtual green room. I believe I'd seen recently Fidelity came out with a report talking about the long-term possible trend for Bitcoin, which was generally quite positive. We've seen other bodies talk about, look, from a risk-adjusted basis, crypto or Bitcoin certainly should be part of portfolios for the
Yeah.
long term. I guess, are we still looking at that generational shift that's pausing some of that, David? In the midst of the chaos, I don't hear a lot of friends and family talking about how do I allocate some of my retirement money to Bitcoin.
Well, remember, still some of the bulge bracket banks, you still can't do that. But look, I think you're seeing Morgan Stanley came out with its own Bitcoin ETF.
Yep.
I'm sure that it will, offer its customers.
Hmm.
I do think having it as part of your portfolio is a good thing. I do think allowing people to have access to it in their retirement accounts is a good thing. So there's still a lot of places where people could get exposure. And I would not sleep on the retirement accounts. A lot of people's net worth are tied up in their retirement accounts, and right now they don't have access.
Yeah.
So small percentage access in their retirement accounts could be a meaningful catalyst.
Yeah.
Because also, if you think about it, if you were waiting for a while, and boy, you look at the Bitcoin chart, oh, it was at 120 something, now it's at 66. And hey, I'd like 2% of my retirement to be in that.
Right.
That looks pretty attractive. I mean, obviously, it could go down to 50 or 55. But if you're buying and holding for the longer term, like that looks attractive.
Yeah. David, I'm going to rip up the script one more time on us, because when look about we look at Bitcoin, we'd have these conversations. If you and I would have said Bitcoin in retirement accounts 10 years ago, obviously no one would have taken that seriously. And that's become a much more serious conversation. You and I have been at more than our fair share of events in the past 13 years, together or separately, where we've heard some cynics say, well, Bitcoin will never get anywhere. I'm using Bitcoin as the example. It's going to zero. I forgot, it might have been 10x research. So if it is, shout out to them. But this idea that Bitcoin will go to zero, someone put forward a mathematical premise that basically said that's going to be impossible at this point. And not only because it's a $1.3 trillion market cap, but they put forward a really interesting argument, David, which was, for something like that to go to zero, you'd have to have every major participant or holder selling everything at any price and no buyers.
Yeah.
And so I guess the long term of this becomes, it's here to stay and there will always be some buyer. Am I being overly philosophic about it?
No, I guess the only thing is if the quantum can break the encryption.
Yes, we need
So
Josh on the call to
yeah.
talk about quantum.
So I think that could be the only thing, but I think the prevailing view is that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I want to make a point though that last week I was in DC, and just seeing the amount of, whether it be senators or Congress people, and talking about this industry and their involvement in the industry, and this is really growing up. And I think it actually leads to a different point, Ron, is TradFi sort of, going back to, is TradFi eating crypto's lunch?
I think you cut out for a split second, buddy.
Oh, that seemed to be an auspicious time for me to get. But that being said, is that something happening here?
Yeah.
Are crypto native companies, going to be losers in this, as there's sort of convergence between TradFi and crypto?
Yeah, I think before you cut out, you were mentioning, is TradFi, is crypto eating TradFi's lunch, or is it the other way around?
No, I was saying, is TradFi eating crypto's lunch? But that's something you've said for a while. So, look, I think if you're a fan of the industry, things are moving well.
Agreed.
I think that, look, the yields on stable coins is an important issue. If you put that on the other side of the ledger for a moment, you're seeing legislation that I think, generally speaking, can move the industry forward in a productive way. And it just, will we get there this time around? But like I said last week, and like Emma mentioned in her comment, we do have this token taxonomy that's been put forward, and rules are going to be put
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
that. And so I don't think I really want to reiterate this is not a zero sum game.
Yeah, agreed. Emma Channing she's had her caffeine today. Emma, it's good to have you back. The best argument on quantum versus Bitcoin versus banking is, does your account have a 4-digit PIN or a 64? Fair point. As you know, David, we're also going to be doing a quantum webinar probably later next month. We're working to get it on the docket to address some of these issues. David, I want to address a couple of things. When we talked about is TradFi eating crypto, it's funny, Phil Berg, shout out to Phil Berg, who co-chairs our legal working group. He was in DC as well. He had noted to me by text message, there are a lot more suits and ties here than he's used to in the past few years. So, TradFi has come to roost within the crypto ecosystem. One thing we don't talk enough about, David, and I want to raise this here, it comes up in our tokenization working group. You and I have chatted about it previously. I saw the news recently that home mortgages, I believe it's Fannie Mae, will be working with Coinbase to allow BTC to be used as collateral. Collateral needs to come up more, I think, in these conversations. And I'll argue that when we're talking about real world assets like real estate, it's an even more complicated conversation. David, what's your initial take on BTC being used as collaterals for mortgages that are supported by Fannie Mae?
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think the issue is I'm a believer in like a lending market and a robust one.
Yeah.
And the issue is what's the LTV?
Yeah.
And what is the interest rate? Is it competitive?
Right.
Look, if you do LTV at 40% at a fair interest rate, that's pretty interesting. 50%. But I would say because of how volatile it is, I don't know how much more than that you can really lend against.
Yeah. And I don't remember the percentage that was put forward. If anyone's watching and they know and can share details, please do. But when you talk about long-term value LTV, David, you have to worry about the value of collateral as well. If that bottoms out, it does really impact some of the participants holding those mortgages. I think some of the concern I had read about is, does it become the government and Fannie Mae as a pseudo-government body backstopping riskier mortgages? We don't want a replay of, the mortgage crisis.
Well, I mean, at least with the crypto, you have a market that's deep and liquid.
Fair.
And you know what the mark to market is versus these some of those homes where people were lying about their income, or these appraisals were a lot of hopium appraisals. So I think you'd have an asset that's easy to mark to market.
Yeah.
And I think it's just creating risk models that are appropriate. So
yeah, let's not do no doc or low doc Bitcoin collateral mortgages going forward.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they're going to have to be custodied and in a way where people can't access them if they're borrowing against them. And I think it can be done. So I don't see it as the same risk. I see it as a risk only if the LTVs are too high.
Right. Again, and the reason I bring this up as well is we're beginning to see the litany of, and I don't want to go into the politics of it, David. You and I do it often, see it, but we're hearing more and more of this is not safe for consumers. Consumer protections need to be put forward. How do we respond to that pushback, particularly in DC?
Look, some politicians are very paternalistic, and
Fair.
they think that they know best. And so I think from that part of the political ecosystem, you just have to take everything with that lens.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think people just have to take ownership of their responsibility. If you don't understand something, should you be investing in it? Should you be buying something you don't understand? This is something like I had a discussion with somebody down in DC who's involved, who's on the Hill and has a meaningful role on the Hill. We were talking about disclosure, and I said to him, look, I think disclosure is important.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. I said, when was the last time you read an S1 if you weren't drafting it?
Right.
And so what I was saying to him was, I said that we need to find a way so there's some disclosure around how many tokens are outstanding, and when could other tokens be, if there are locks on tokens, when could they be unlocked, and
Yeah.
if there are parties that have locked tokens, when they could unlock them, so people could really know what the denominator is when they're buying
Right.
something. So I
Yeah.
think that would be really important. And like people should be named as who they are as part of the project, so people could Google them and make their own
Yeah.
determination. So I think there's some simple disclosure that's reasonable,
Yeah. Not burdensome.
not burdensome. You should be able to know what the truly diluted market value is of a token.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like one website has one and another has a different number.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of things are really helpful.
Hmm.
Um, but what kind of disclosures do you want? I mean, I think also that has something to play with it.
Yeah, David, I'm with you. You used the Yes One example. You and I have chatted about that before. I often will bring up the OCC, not Office of Control of the Currency, the Options Clearing Corp required disclosures when you open an options contract. You and I have been joking about options and liquidations. I do not know anyone who trades options that's read the Options Clearing Corp disclosures. So there's got to be a level of self protection here.
Yeah.
Do your homework, caveat emptor. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, David. David, let's go geopolitical because we're running out a bit of time. But um, looking at the conflict in Iran, there is a certain geoeconomic impact to that. We've talked about gas prices. We've talked about, and I think there are others that people are ignoring. I think liquid natural gas, certainly. I think it was Fortune that had a really wonderful profile on the challenges for fertilizer, because fertilizer comes through some of those channels and in some ships through the Strait of Hormuz, and that really impacts global economic activity, believe it or not, and other potash and some other stuff that I'm not smart enough to understand. David, let's put the Brill prediction hat on, though. If this resolves in some way before the start of summer, how do you think markets respond?
Well, there's definitely going to be interruptions that haven't been priced in,
Right.
and I think it's hard to quantify that. But look, I think if you want to look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
do you want a player in the ecosystem? Do you want Iran
Mm.
to be able to hold this over people's heads at any time?
Right.
And literally, if they did have a nuclear device, do you want a nuclear capable country who has been a documented bad actor,
Hmm.
funding terrorism in different countries, currently bombing their neighbors who aren't involved in the wars, and not just hitting bases, but just hitting economic facilities,
Airports.
airports,
Yeah.
you know, hotels, going after natural gas facilities. Do you want somebody empowered who could, if they had nuclear bombs, like hold, potentially partially hold the world hostage to their demands? So I think if people could take a step back and just sort of think about that, and think about that, we're at a place where who knows, if this were to go another 4 to 6 weeks,
Yep.
you know, this regime could be flattened completely. And I mean, I don't, let's say that like as far as a loss of life goes, because you don't want to see that. But I think that maybe this is some pain that we all take for some, a big future gain.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I'm looking at it.
I
Trying
agree.
to get down the middle, but like more from an economic side of things.
Yeah, and I tend to try. Many of you watching know this, and David, you and I talk about this a lot. We have personal opinions from a political perspective. I try to avoid those because these are traumatic and difficult times across the board. Whatever your potential political belief. One thing I didn't study enough, and we brought up Iran in the context of this conversation, David, and I don't know enough about the data behind it, but I had seen some blurbs of reporting, and I'm not sure if you saw them, how BTC was being used to get capital out of Iran, or
Yeah.
broadly just call it out of conflict zones. David, I guess how true is that, and how much of that in your mind is a feature, not a bug, in the context of being able to manage and own capital?
Well, look, I think it's a feature because this is a bad example of maybe bad actors who are moving it. But then if you're in Ukraine and you're in another country where there's upheaval, and you're not a bad actor, you're a citizen, and this is a way to move. If let's say a bank gets blown up, and maybe you had cash in that bank,
Mm.
and this is something where you could move your value freely.
Yeah.
So I think that's a feature. I mean, obviously they're bad actors and they're going to try and take
Yeah.
advantage of it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a feature.
Yeah. And
What do you think?
yeah, I often, my personal opinion is everyone should be able to control their economic life to the extent they are able to control their economic life. And I think crypto and Bitcoin are one examples of ways to do that. This argument that it's meant for illicit activity only is you can't apply it to any kind of ecosystem, David. People to this day still say the internet is bad because it enables X, Y, and Z. We get that point. Bad actors will use any avenue they can. It's about protecting yourselves against that.
And look, also, ultimately, cash is used more for money laundering and
Oh
bad
yeah,
activities than crypto is, and crypto is traceable.
right.
So,
It's a
I,
really horrible money laundering illicit activity
yeah,
tool.
because even if they can't figure out who you are now, the more sophisticated the tracing gets over time, they will figure it out.
Yeah, and there are tools and companies we know that have been deeply involved in that work for a long time.
Yeah, and look, my company has done some very sophisticated tracking and tracing for customers,
Yeah.
for clients, both personal and institutional, and so I know the level that can be done, and it's more than people appreciate.
And it's far more than is portrayed in the media, I would argue.
Yeah,
Not to meant to bash media particularly, but I just don't think there's the education and understanding of it.
yeah. And the last thing I want to say about the conflict is, I think our media.
Uh-oh.
See, I'm trying to couch this the best way I can. I think that sometimes they've taken the most pessimistic view of what's going on
Yeah.
and not really gone in depth and sort of laid out the different scenarios and what it means.
Yeah.
And, like, for the one thing I will say is, like, a resolution in this, depending if this were to resolve favorably for the US, like, maybe that tips the scales, and then you get a truce in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, I think that I think unfortunately the news in many cases doesn't really go in depth and doesn't look at how these different actions interact with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of to the detriment of people and the way it's reported.
Emma sending kudos to the one and only David Brill, 100% David Brill. The point is that the vast majority of crypto is designed to be traceable. Absolutely correct. David, you bring up a couple of things there about media, and this is suddenly becoming much more than a crypto roundup, but I do want to raise one idea about that. That media is reacting to where people are drawing attention,
Mm.
and negative news, I don't know what the cause, maybe there's some philosopher or anthropologist out there who can educate me, negative sells. And I think you see that when we talk about crypto. I think you see that when we talk about geopolitical events. You talk about private markets. It's going to be the next great financial crisis. There's this skew towards reporting the worst case of some of these things versus what are the options.
Yeah, and also, like, when did everybody become, eh, you know, we shouldn't be always looking in the negative. Like, we should try and look for positive things, and, like,
Hmm.
and focus on things where, there are positive outcomes that can also come from these things, and not just negative outcomes. And I think questioning what our government does is appropriate. But I
Yeah.
also think that minimizing what bad actors do in the total, approach is also not helpful.
Welcome to the WSBA Therapist's Couch, where David and
Well,
Ron talk about most pressing issues.
I just wonder sometimes where people forget that, 30,000 civilians were killed because they were protesting.
Yeah.
Like, that just, it seems like that whole notion has just left people's mind share. And, I think these are just important things just to balance everything out.
Yeah, David, I agree. And the older I get, the less I understand basically anything that's happening in the news.
I know. I'm just trying to. The point I'm trying to make is, like, even though, like, in our industry we're going through these challenges,
Yeah.
we're still in a much better place than we were.
Agreed.
If we don't get clarity, we have the rulemaking that the SEC and the CFTC is doing. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're getting nothing. It's just hopefully we're going to get a bill that can represent our interests and move the industry forward.
Yeah, and arguably a bill that sort of protects the industry writ large and all participants in it, as well as investors in the wake of potentially a new administration.
Yeah.
You can make the argument that even if there's a new administration, it's so relatively entrenched in so much of global markets, it would sort of be very difficult to unwind it.
Yeah. Look, we have these Bitcoin ETFs, Ether ETFs, it'd be really impossible to sort of be like, okay, no, these are all securities now, and they all have to be rolled back, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
But
and Washington doesn't want to see BlackRock and Morgan Stanley showing up in DC in 4 years saying, no, don't do this.
well, it's not what the people want either.
Agreed.
Because if people didn't want that, they wouldn't be buying allocations of it.
Yeah. David, we're approaching time. Let Emma Channing, but there's some buggishness. Totally agree. I rarely find myself disagreeing with Emma on anything she puts forward, David. It's good to see you, my friend. It's been a full week. A lot's gone on. I want to ask a question. Let's wrap it up with the David prediction hat. Just real quickly, because we're looking at 65.8. Where are you seeing volume? And we talked about some of the options positions, and we see some ridiculous price points. I think I saw options at 30, and I've seen some others at 110. I don't think we're in that kind of very big range. David, do we hold 65 given some of the flows you and I are seeing?
Unless we get some news unless we get major news regarding the conflict that either the strait's been opened or some kind of resolution, I think we're still in a stage 4 downtrend, and I would say 60 is next.
Do we leg down to 60? Okay, I'll agree with you there, David. David, let's wrap it up there. We've got a lot of work going on from a WSBA perspective. We're going to be in Washington in May. I'm working on that. Looking forward to seeing you there again, David, with so many of our colleagues. We're working on our response to the OCC, Office of Control of the Currencies, notice of proposed rulemaking. Embarrassingly, I still haven't read the whole 360 something pages, David. And I think you've been very, very busy now that baseball is back.
Oh, Greg Murphy has weighed in. Okay. Well, Greg, as you know, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. So
don't do it, Greg. Don't do
Greg
it.
Murphy's made a prediction that Alabama will beat Michigan, and my poor friend to the north is a little deluded on this issue. But I'm certainly willing to put some BTC or ETH on the line here, my friend. We can take that offline, or we can make it live for people. But
Greg, learn from my pain, buddy. Don't do it.
But I will be spending my time watching Michigan tonight and March Madness this weekend, and some work. And then I have the good fortune, I'll be speaking at American University's Washington College of Law Symposium with some of our WSBA colleagues, Lee Schneider, Andrew Siegel, and others. So I'm really looking forward to that. That'll be Tuesday in DC.
Yeah, and we've been sharing that on the usual socials. David, I can't be there, but I'm hoping some colleagues get an opportunity to see you on stage, buddy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Just a beer, not dinner. No, David doesn't go lowbrow. It's going to cost you, Greg.
For Greg, it'll be a case of Molson. That'll be the. I'm up.
You asked for it, Greg. That's all I got to tell you, buddy.
I'm up for that. What about David, you, Ron? Before we.
Well, believe it or not, I promised my wife a nice dinner this evening, so I'm supposed to put the work away at some point. I don't know when that is. A lot of my weekend's going to be planning some of the WSBA work that we have. Plus, there's a holiday coming up next weekend. Apparently, we're going to my sister's, so I have to talk to her about some of that. So it's a relatively low-key weekend, David. I wager on nothing sports-related at all. But otherwise, David, it's so good to see you. Emma, Greg, everyone out there, great. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there. We will be back next week, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.